I've always been the one working quietly in the background, the one nobody notices until something goes wrong. My name's Amber Talcott. I'm a data strategist at a mid-level consultancy firm in Chicago. I'm in my early 30s, but I already feel like I've been here too long, stuck in the same role, doing the same work, with nothing more than a small office and the occasional thank you to show for it. I spend my days buried in numbers. I analyze them, clean them, create models, make them understandable for people who don't even know the first thing about data. The way I see it, numbers are like a puzzle, each one holding a key to unlocking something important. The spreadsheets? They're my domain. I live in them. I make sense of the chaos, but most importantly, I make the complex simple. And that's my job, really, to take mountains of data and turn them into something everyone can understand, no matter how complex or difficult it is. But despite the praise I get from the team and my bosses, Derek especially, always telling me how great I am at my job, no one seems to notice how much I actually do for this company. It's always someone else who gets the promotions, someone else who gets the spotlight. They praise me for my work, but that's it. I'm never offered the big projects. I'm never the one invited into the high-level meetings, and I'm used to it. I don't complain. After all, that's just the way things are. But lately, the whole situation has begun to grate on me. I know I deserve more. I've worked my ass off for years, been passed over again and again, and now it's starting to feel like all I am is the quiet one, the behind-the-scenes player who will never get her due. A couple of weeks ago, Derek called me into his office. I thought maybe this time it was my turn, but no. Instead, he asked me to prepare a pitch for a huge retail transformation project. Kellerson, a major client, had asked for us to lead a massive overhaul of their customer data system. The stakes were high, and if we landed this project, it could change everything for the company. I thought it was finally my time to step into the spotlight. This was the kind of project that could make me shine. Derek was all smiles, telling me how essential my expertise was to this pitch. He even joked that without me, the numbers wouldn't make any sense at all. "You're the glue that holds this whole thing together," he said, flashing his typical grin, and in that moment, I was ready to prove him right. I worked late for days straight, getting everything perfect. I crafted the most detailed, crystal-clear data models. I double-checked everything, making sure it was flawless. This was my moment, the one where I would show the world just how valuable I was. I was ready to bring my A-game, and nothing was going to stop me, not this time. But then, a few days before the pitch, Derek dropped a bombshell. He told me there was someone else joining the project team, a new hire, someone who would be leading the project. That was the moment I felt my heart sink. Not because the person was unqualified, but because it wasn't going to be me. The new hire's name was Connor Lively, a charismatic guy who'd just joined the firm a few months ago. He had the looks, the confidence, and the charm. In a meeting, he'd probably make the crowd laugh. He was good at getting attention, and people liked him, but as for the work, I wasn't so sure. Derek made it sound like Connor was just the right person to lead the project. I had been preparing for this opportunity for months, and now it was being handed to someone who wasn't even familiar with the client, someone who didn't have a clue about the complex data I had spent years learning how to manipulate. Still, Derek reassured me that I would play an important supporting role, helping Connor with the data, but it didn't feel like support. It felt like being sidelined, shoved into the back while the showy, loud new guy took center stage. It didn't sit well with me. As I sat there in Derek's office, trying to hide my frustration behind a professional smile, I realized something. Connor wasn't going to respect me. He was going to treat me like another cog in the machine, just another assistant to get his numbers right. But I wasn't just a numbers girl. I was the one who had put the work into making this project possible. I knew the ins and outs of this data better than anyone else in the company. And yet here I was, invisible once again. And that's when something clicked. If this project was going to succeed, it wasn't going to be because of Connor's smooth talk and flashy presentations. It was going to be because of the data I'd been building behind the scenes, the data that no one had noticed, but everyone would need when it was time to make this work. I took a deep breath as I left Derek's office, already mentally preparing for what lay ahead. This was my project, even if I wasn't the one leading it. If Connor wanted to take the credit, fine. But I would make sure he had to rely on me to get it done. After all, the truth was clear. Without me, this project wouldn't go anywhere, and I wasn't about to let anyone forget that. I had just been handed a new challenge, and I was ready to take it on. The email pinged in my inbox around 9:30 a.m. Derek's name appeared at the top, and I sighed, knowing it wasn't going to be a good one. I opened it, bracing myself. Amber, I've got some updates for you regarding the Kellerson pitch. We've decided that Connor Lively will be leading the team for the project. I know you've put in a lot of hard work preparing, and we'll still need you to handle the data side of things, but Connor will be in charge. Let me know if you have any questions. I felt my stomach twist, reading the words, Connor Lively. A new hire, a guy who had been with the company for less than 6 months. He'd barely even sat in on any of the meetings about Kellerson, but suddenly, he was in charge of the most important pitch the company had seen in years, the one that could change everything for all of us. My mind raced, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I was already mentally preparing for a serious conversation with Derek when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching my desk. I looked up to see him standing in front of me with his usual confident smile. "Morning, Amber," he said casually, the weight of the email I had just read hanging between us. "Morning, Derek?" My voice was tight, and I couldn't help but feel my eyes narrowing just slightly. "We've got a great plan going with Connor," Derek continued, clearly oblivious to the disappointment creeping through me. "He's got the leadership skills we need to bring Kellerson in, and we'll need you to back him up with the data, to make sure everything's accurate." I nodded, but the words didn't settle in my mind the way they should have. I had worked so hard on this project. I'd crafted the models, analyzed the numbers, fine-tuned everything down to the smallest detail, and now I was supposed to hand it all over to some flashy new guy who'd barely earned his place here. I swallowed the bitter taste in my throat. "Got it," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll support Connor however I can." Derek's grin widened, like I had just handed him a gold star. "That's the spirit, Amber. I knew you'd be on board. You're such an essential part of this team." Essential. The word echoed in my mind. If I was so essential, why was I always in the background? Why was I always the one behind the curtain, building the foundation that others got to walk on without so much as a second glance? I watched as Derek turned to walk away, heading toward Connor's office with a spring in his step. My chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment I had worked for. Only it wasn't going to be mine. Connor Lively, the golden boy with his bright smile and quick confidence, was going to take the spotlight, and I, once again, was going to be invisible. For the next few days, I worked quietly, putting together the final numbers for the pitch, making sure every piece of data was exactly where it needed to be. I built new models, updated projections, and created reports that Connor would no doubt present as his own, standing in front of the client, using my work as a foundation for his success. He had already started calling me spreadsheet queen in front of the team, as if what I did was something trivial, something that could be dismissed with a casual chuckle. But I wasn't just a spreadsheet queen. I was the one who made the data make sense. I was the one who turned chaos into clarity, and the thought of seeing him take credit for my work, my years of experience, my dedication, my late nights, was infuriating. Still, I kept my head down, putting the finishing touches on everything, doing exactly what was asked of me. I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the air, the creeping sense of frustration, the rising anger that I kept buried deep inside. I would never be the one to stand in the spotlight, but maybe, just maybe, I could make sure that when everything fell apart, it would be Connor's failure, not mine. For now, I would do my job. But the quiet rage inside me simmered, ready to boil over when the time was right. I didn't have to be the leader to be the one who made this project work, and when it was all over, they would know who had done the real work behind the scenes. The next 6 weeks of the Kellerson project felt like a blur of endless spreadsheets, model updates, and meetings where I barely spoke. I kept my head down, focused on the work, the only thing that seemed to matter. Meanwhile, Connor continued to play the role of the strategic genius, charming everyone in his path, smiling for the cameras, and presenting our team as a united front. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Connor barely acknowledged the work I was doing. Instead, He kept referring to it in passing, dismissing it with casual remarks. "Let's check with this spreadsheet queen for the numbers," he'd say with a grin, like it was some kind of joke. I hated that nickname. It wasn't just because of the condescending tone with which he said it, but because it minimized everything I did. The data models I created were crucial to the entire project. Without them, none of the flashy presentations or client-facing strategies would have had any foundation. But Connor didn't see it that way. To him, it was just boring little spreadsheets he could throw to the side when he didn't feel like digging deeper into the actual work. I could hear him talking to Derek in the hall one afternoon, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Amber's been really helpful with the numbers," he said. "But I really need to take the lead on this. It's my project, after all." I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. His project? My work was the backbone of the project. Without me, he wouldn't even know where to begin, let alone lead anything, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't afford to. I was stuck, relegated to the background, while Connor, the loud, confident, and arrogant newcomer, stood at the front, basking in the attention. Each day felt like I was carrying the weight of the project on my shoulders. I was building the models, fixing the data, updating the calculations, and tweaking the projections. All the while, Connor was working his charm on the clients, making executive presentations that left me in the shadows. During one of our late-night sessions, I was sitting at my desk, making adjustments to a new set of customer acquisition metrics, when Connor strolled over, dropping his jacket on the chair beside me. "Hey, Amber," he said, as if we were friends. I was thinking, we should make the final numbers look a bit more polished, Clean them up, add some color coding, make them more visually appealing. No one wants to look at all that boring data. It's gotta be sexy. He paused, grinning at his own words. "It's all about the presentation, right?" I clenched my fists under the desk, my knuckles white. "It's not just about making it look pretty, Connor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The numbers need to be accurate. They need to be able to stand up to scrutiny. It's not about presentation, it's about substance," he shrugged, giving me a dismissive wave. Yeah, I get it. Just make it look nicer. The clients don't want to see a bunch of numbers on a screen. They want to see results." I felt the frustration bubble up in me, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't lose control. I had to stay focused. I knew what was at stake, and I couldn't let him derail everything. But every day that passed, every time he belittled my work or acted like I wasn't even there, the tension grew. I watched him strut around the office, taking credit for things he hadn't done, while I remained hidden in the background, silently making everything work. He would speak at meetings, making big claims about our strategy, about how well the project was going, but all the while, I was the one staying late, fixing errors, ensuring that everything was aligned. Despite all the tension, I stayed focused. I kept my eyes on the prize, getting this project right. If I could do that, if I could just make sure the numbers held up, then maybe, just maybe, I could make him see what I was truly capable of. I would show him, and everyone else, exactly who was the real architect behind this project. But for now, I had to wait, stay quiet, and let the work speak for itself. It was a typical late evening in the office, the kind where the fluorescent lights buzz and everything feels too quiet, except for the soft click of keyboards. I had been going over the models again, double-checking all the numbers before the final presentation. The whole team was supposed to meet the next morning to review everything, but I had a feeling I needed to make sure Connor's version of the data was bulletproof. I opened the files that Connor had been working on. As I scanned through them, my stomach sank. It wasn't that the models were wrong, it was that they were incomplete. Worse, they had been changed in a way that made them look simpler, flashier, and cleaner. But I knew, deep down, the numbers didn't add up. I clicked through the tabs and saw what I was dreading. He had copied my work. He had taken the models I had spent weeks fine-tuning and altered them. Some of the changes were subtle, others glaring. He had smoothed over crucial calculations that were integral to the integrity of the entire project. The customer acquisition cost, a key metric, had been altered to show much lower numbers than were actually possible. The assumptions made were based on outdated data that I had painstakingly removed for being irrelevant. I felt the heat of anger rise in my chest. He hadn't even bothered to make sure the changes were sound. It was as if he thought no one would notice, as if he believed the audience wouldn't care, or worse, that they'd never look closely at the details. He was setting the entire project up for failure, all so he could waltz in and take credit for something that wasn't even his. I closed the file, took a deep breath, and stared at the screen. I knew I had to make a decision. I could confront him now, but that would create a scene, and it wasn't my style. No, I needed to wait. I needed him to expose himself in front of the client. He couldn't get away with this, not after everything I'd worked for. Instead, I opened my own untouched version of the model, the one that had all the correct assumptions and data. I started going through it again, making sure everything was flawless. It was painstaking work, but I had to be ready. I knew that Connor wouldn't be able to explain the inconsistencies in his version once the client started asking questions. And when that happened, I'd be ready to step in with the truth. For now, I quietly gathered evidence. I saved his altered files, made sure I had copies of all the changes he'd made, and documented every instance where he'd been careless or deceitful. Tomorrow, he was going to walk into that room full of executives, ready to present numbers that were built on lies, and I was going to let him. I wasn't going to save him. I was going to let him fail spectacularly. I sat back in my chair, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. This was my moment, my work, my expertise, my integrity. They would all speak louder than any flashy presentation. I had done my part, and now it was time for Connor to do his. And when it all came crashing down, I would be there. Not to say I told you so, but to show them all exactly who had made this project possible. The day before the client presentation, the office was unusually quiet, as most people were busy finalizing their last-minute tasks. I arrived early, as I often did, to ensure everything was in order before the chaos of the day began. But today, there was something different in the air. A quiet, determined energy was building in me. I had spent the night going over the presentation. My mind raced with the calculations I had built and the changes Connor had made. I could already predict exactly when his mistakes would start to show. His alterations were sloppy, the kind of changes that only someone who didn't care enough about the details would make. The models he'd presented were incomplete and inaccurate, but I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to be the one to ruin his moment. I was going to let him do it himself. I had my own version of the model ready, the untouched, unaltered version that was flawless. The data was solid, and it was built on the correct assumptions. This was the version that would impress the client. This was the version that could save the project. But it wasn't just about saving the project for me. It was about showing everyone that I had the expertise, the skills, and the vision they hadn't given me credit for. With a steady hand, I prepared everything. I double-checked the numbers one last time, and then saved the final files to a secured drive, encrypting them just in case. I wasn't taking any chances. As I sat at my desk, my mind went over the worst-case scenarios. What if Connor tried to push back, accuse me of sabotaging him? What if the client didn't see the mistakes? It was a gamble, but I was ready. Around 10 a.m., Connor walked in, breezing past my desk with his usual confidence. He glanced at my screen, giving me a small, dismissive wave. "Hey, Amber," he said, grinning. "Got everything ready for tomorrow. Let's make sure this goes off without a hitch. Big day for me, you know." I forced a smile, nodding. "Got everything, Connor. It's all set." "Good," he replied, his tone laced with self-assurance. "I'll make sure it goes perfectly. I'll handle the presentation. You just make sure the data's on point." My jaw tightened at his words, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I simply nodded again. Of course. He turned and left my desk, heading straight for Derek's office. As he passed, I couldn't help but notice the confident swagger in his walk. It irritated me more than I cared to admit. How could he be so sure of himself when the very work he was presenting was built on a foundation of my work? I spent the next few hours in a quiet daze, going over the final details of my version. The project had been my responsibility from the start, and now I was the one who had to fix it. I had to make sure the numbers were perfect, because I knew when the time came, no one would be looking at Connor's work. They would be looking at me, and I couldn't let them down. By mid-afternoon, I felt ready. The backups were in place, the model secure. My heart raced a little as I sat back and took a deep breath, staring at the clock. It was nearly time. Connor's big moment was approaching. He would be the one standing at the front of the room, taking credit for everything. But in the end, it would be my work that carried this project. It was my data that would make the difference. I watched as the office began to empty for the day, people finishing up their work and heading home. The presentation was the next morning, and tomorrow, everything would change. I stayed behind, knowing that it was my turn to shine, even if no one realized it yet. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave for the night, I made sure to lock my files and double-check everything. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Tomorrow the truth would come out, and when it did, Connor wouldn't even know what hit him. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation as the client, Kellerson's executive team, filed into the sleek modern conference room. Connor, confidently standing at the front, smiled as he adjusted his notes. Behind him, the large screen displayed the first slide. Kellerson Retail Transformation Project, Final Presentation. He glanced at me quickly, and I returned a neutral expression. He had no idea what was coming. I've been working closely with my team, Connor started, his voice warm and full of authority, to build a comprehensive solution for Kellerson's data transformation. We believe this model will not only help optimize your processes, but drive significant growth in customer acquisition and retention. Let's dive in. I sat at the back of the room, far enough to stay out of the spotlight, but close enough to watch the train wreck about to unfold. Connor clicked to the next slide, and the first set of numbers appeared. He made his usual charming smile as he pointed at the customer acquisition cost, CAC, metric. Our projections indicate a 15% decrease in CAC, he said confidently, which is a major win for you, Kellerson. The numbers on the screen didn't match what I had calculated. In fact, they were dangerously off. I knew that as soon as they tried to dive into the interactive model, the problems would start. Connor's changes were hasty, sloppy, and now the clients would see that. The client's CEO, Mara, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense attitude, leaned forward, frowning at the screen. "Can you walk us through how you arrived at that figure?" she asked, her tone cool but probing. Connor didn't seem fazed. "Of course," he replied smoothly, reaching for the mouse to demonstrate, but as he clicked through the data, the screen froze for a moment. He tapped the mouse again, trying to get it to load, but there was no response. A couple of uncomfortable seconds passed. I watched as Connor's smile faltered, and the room grew quiet. His fingers fumbled with the controls, trying to pull up the numbers. He glanced over at me, looking for help, but I kept my eyes on the screen, my face unreadable. "Something's off with the model," he muttered under his breath, but the damage was already done. Mara's eyes flicked from him to the data on the screen, and I could see the skepticism in her gaze growing. Finally, Mara spoke again. "Connor," she said slowly, "it's important that we understand the details. These numbers don't seem to align with our previous discussions. Can you explain why the customer acquisition cost is so much lower than we anticipated, and what's going on with the projections for long-term retention?" Connor opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He stammered a bit, clearly rattled. "Well, the numbers are based on certain assumptions Before he could finish, Mara's sharp eyes flicked to me. She had noticed the discrepancy, just like I knew she would. "Amber?" she asked, her voice calm but direct. "Can you shed some light on this? Is the data correct?" I stood slowly, the room quiet as all eyes turned to me. Connor's gaze was a mixture of surprise and annoyance, but I didn't let it faze me. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I walked to the front of the room, my steps measured and confident. I clicked the mouse, pulling up the original, unaltered version of the model. The numbers were clear and precise. The data spoke for itself. "Actually, Mara, these numbers," I said, pointing at the screen, "are not accurate. The customer acquisition cost should be significantly higher, based on the updated model we've been working on. The assumptions Connor used here have been manipulated, and they don't reflect the real situation." I could see the shift in the room, the tension building. Connor's face reddened, but I didn't stop. I continued walking through the data, showing the inconsistencies, the sloppy alterations, and the mistakes he had made in the projections. The more I spoke, the more it became evident that the entire presentation was built on a house of cards. Mara turned to Connor, her gaze unblinking. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice colder now. Connor opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He glanced around the room as if looking for an escape, but there was no getting out of this. He stammered, clearly defeated. I took a breath and stepped in. "I've been working on this model for weeks. The assumptions were carefully vetted. The projections here are based on accurate data, not speculation. And while I understand that presenting this data is a big responsibility," I said, locking eyes with Connor, "it's important to be transparent with the client. We need to work with the right numbers, not ones that look good on paper but won't hold up." There was a long pause as Mara turned back to Connor, who looked like he was about to crumble under the pressure. Finally, Mara spoke again. "Thank you, Amber. I appreciate your honesty, and I think we'll be needing you to take over the presentation from here." She didn't need to say more. The room understood what was happening. Connor stood motionless, his face pale and his hands trembling at his sides. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me now. This was my moment, my opportunity to show them all that I was more than just the quiet one, the one whose work no one saw. I was the one who made the project work, and now they were going to see that. "Let me walk you through the correct numbers," I said, my voice steady and calm. As I took over the presentation, I could see the relief on Mara's face. The executives at the table nodded as I moved through the correct projections. They were listening, and they were finally seeing the value I brought to the table. Connor, meanwhile, stood in the back, his expression a mix of shame and frustration. I knew he wouldn't speak up again, not after what had just happened. The presentation had failed, but in that failure, I had found my moment of vindication. It wasn't about taking credit for the project. It was about showing everyone that without me, this project wouldn't have gone anywhere. The moment Connor's presentation fell apart, the room's atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, a murmur of confusion among the Kellerson executives, a couple of exchanged glances, but the cracks in his facade were becoming obvious. And with each passing minute, I could feel the air growing thicker, the tension building as Connor stumbled over his words, unable to explain the discrepancies in the data. Mara, the CEO of Kellerson, had seen enough. She sat up straighter, her sharp eyes never leaving Connor as he fumbled with the screen. Her voice cut through the silence. "Connor," she said, her tone calm but firm, "we need answers. This presentation is not what we agreed upon." I could see Connor's face flushing. He was trying to hold on to whatever semblance of control he had left, but it was slipping through his fingers. I didn't need to say a word. Mara had already realized what I had known for weeks. The numbers were wrong, the assumptions faulty, and the entire project was at risk. As the room waited, I took a deep breath. It was my turn. I stood up slowly, walking to the front as Connor's shoulders sagged. The murmurs of the team faded, and all eyes were on me. I clicked the mouse, and the original, unaltered model appeared on the screen. The difference was like night and day. The data was clean, the numbers lined up, the projections solid. I began explaining it calmly, walking the team through the correct assumptions, showing them the robust model I had created. Connor didn't interrupt. I could see his frustration mounting as I spoke, but he knew, deep down, that he had been caught. When I finished, Mara turned to me. "Amber, thank you for stepping in. I think we all needed that clarity." She glanced briefly at Connor, who had gone eerily silent, standing at the back of the room, his face an unreadable mask. "I've been following this project closely," Mara continued, her eyes focused on me. "It's clear to me now that we've been relying on the wrong person to lead. Amber, you have the expertise and vision we need to move this forward." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She didn't say the words I expected. That Connor had failed, that he was out. But it was clear enough. Her tone was final. Her attention was fully on me now. The room's energy had shifted in my favor. Mara nodded toward me, signaling for me to take over. "You're in charge now, Amber," she said. "Let's move forward with you leading the project." I felt a rush of relief and vindication, all the quiet frustration, all the hours spent behind the scenes, building models that no one saw. It had all led to this moment. It was my time now. The room was silent for a moment, but then the energy started to change again. People began nodding, murmuring their approval. I looked at the team, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to respect. Connor, on the other hand, stood motionless. I could see the anger bubbling just below the surface, but I wasn't concerned. His face reddened as Mara looked over at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid this isn't working out," she said coolly. "Connor, I'll have security escort you out. We'll discuss your future with the company later." There was no reaction from him. He didn't even protest. With a quiet nod, he left the room, escorted by security. As he walked past me, I caught his eye, but I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The room was still, all eyes were on me, and for the first time, it wasn't because I was invisible. I wasn't just the quiet one in the background anymore. I was the one in charge. Mara gave me a slight smile. "Amber, we're putting the project in your hands from here on out. Let's get this back on track." It was surreal. I had worked for years, unseen, unnoticed, but now, everything had changed. My quiet strength, the work I'd done in the shadows, had finally been acknowledged. As the team began to gather around, ready to discuss the next steps, I felt a rush of gratitude. This was what I had been working for. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I looked at the team, taking a deep breath before speaking. "All right, everyone, let's get started. We've got a lot of work to do." And for the first time, I knew they were all listening. The day after Connor's catastrophic presentation, the office felt different. People looked at me in a way they hadn't before, with a mix of curiosity and respect. Whispers floated through the hallways, and even Derek, usually so caught up in his own world, gave me a long, thoughtful look as I passed by his office. The weight of everything that had happened was starting to settle in, and I felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through me. For the first time, people saw me, really saw me. But the shift wasn't just internal. That afternoon, I got an email from Mara, the CEO of Kellerson. Her message was short but direct. "Amber, please join me in my office for a brief discussion about the project." I clicked open the email with a mix of anticipation and nerves. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I knew the decision had already been made. The project was mine to lead, but still, the thought of hearing it from her directly made my hands shake just a little as I set my laptop down. When I arrived at her office, Mara was sitting behind her desk, a calm, confident presence. She gestured to the chair across from her, and I sat down, waiting for her to speak. "Amber," she began, folding her hands on the table, "I want to thank you for stepping in the way you did yesterday. Your integrity and expertise are exactly what Kellerson needs." I felt a flush of pride at her words, but I kept my face neutral. "Thank you, Mara. I just wanted to make sure the project stayed on track." She smiled. A rare moment of warmth. "I can see that, which is why I'm offering you the role of project lead moving forward." My heart skipped a beat. Led for the first time, I was being given the reins. I swallowed, not trusting my voice immediately, but then nodded. "I appreciate the opportunity." She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You've proven yourself, Amber, and the entire leadership team at Kellerson, agrees. We want you to take charge and ensure that the project moves forward with the right data, the right strategy." I nodded again, more assured now. The validation I'd been seeking, that I had been quietly working for, was finally coming to fruition, but Mara wasn't done. "I'd also like to explore a more permanent role for you," she continued. "Perhaps a position within our innovation lab. Your ability to turn raw data into something meaningful is invaluable. We could use that kind of expertise on a wider scale. What do you think?" My thoughts raced. The offer of a permanent role in Kellerson's innovation lab, potentially leading future projects, was a dream come true. But I also knew that this was only the beginning. The next few months, the next few years, they were full of potential, and I was finally in the driver's seat. "I think it sounds like a fantastic opportunity," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But for now, I'm focused on getting this project right." Mara nodded. "I like that. I'll leave you to settle into your new role, but I wanted to ensure you know how much we value what you bring to the table. You're going places, Amber." I left Mara's office with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just another cog in the machine anymore. I was the machine, the one steering this project forward. The next day, I walked into my new office. It was bigger, quieter, and more spacious than the one I had occupied for the past few years. My corner office looked out over the city, and for the first time, I saw everything from a new perspective. The view seemed to symbolize what was happening in my career. Everything I had worked for was finally coming together. I settled into my chair and opened my laptop, already planning the next phase of the project. My work was only just beginning. The project was mine to lead, but the future was mine to shape. I could feel the weight of the possibilities pressing in on me, and it was exhilarating. I had spent so long in the shadows, building complex data models, quietly ensuring everything was aligned. Now I had the power to set the direction. As I reviewed the next steps for the Kellerson project, I allowed myself a small moment of reflection. I had worked for this. All the late nights, all the overlooked contributions, all the times I had been passed over, they had led to this moment, and now, no one could deny the value I brought to the table. I sat back and let the silence of my office settle around me. This was it. My journey had come full circle. The quiet analyst had become the leader, and I was ready to take on whatever came next. It had been months since I first stepped into the shadows of the Kellerson project, unseen and unappreciated. Yet now, standing at the front of the room in the final stages of the first phase, I felt like I was finally where I belonged. The project, my project, was coming together seamlessly, and with every passing day, it exceeded expectations. Connor, now a forgotten figure in the background, no longer had a part to play. His contribution had evaporated with the disaster of his presentation. The numbers I had created were the ones that had made this project successful, the models that had finally brought Kellerson's strategy to life. It wasn't his empty promises or slick salesmanship. It was the hard work and integrity of the data that made the difference. It wasn't lost on me how far I had come. From the quiet analyst who worked overtime, doing all the work behind the scenes, to the leader standing in front of the room, answering questions with confidence, guiding my team towards success. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of frustration, a feeling like I was invisible, working tirelessly only to be overlooked. But now, I had proven myself. The final phase of the project was a triumph. The data was clean, the metrics aligned, the assumptions sound. Everything I had fought for, every model I had meticulously built, had paid off. The CEO of Kellerson, Mara, was impressed, and I could see her eyes glimmer with satisfaction as I led the presentation. The team was finally seeing the fruits of my labor, and they were all on board. But it wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about what came next. The doors that had once been closed to me now stood wide open. I had earned my place at the table. I didn't allow myself to get too caught up in the moment. The work was still far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of pride in what I had accomplished. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk in my corner office, the one I had always wanted but never thought I would have, my phone buzzed, a message from Sandra Kellerman, the head of the client company. "I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss the future of the project," it read. "Your work has been exceptional. I see a great future for you at Kellerson." I couldn't help but smile as I put my phone down. It was happening. My career was taking off, and I was finally in control of my future. As I looked out over the city from my new office, the lights twinkling below, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. It hadn't been an easy road, but it had been mine, and now I was ready for whatever came next. The quiet analyst had become the driving force behind the project's success, and as the first phase wrapped up, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them head on. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the behind-the-scenes worker anymore. I had turned that invisibility into undeniable power, and there was no stopping me now. With a satisfied smile, I turned back to my computer, ready to plan the next phase. The future was mine to shape, and I was going to make it count.